Thousands of people have mysteriously vanished in America's wilderness. Under strange and unexplainable circumstances. Most cases remain unsolved. What happened? Where did they go? Locations unknown.
Thousands of people have mysteriously vanished in America's wilderness. Join us as we dive into the deep end of the unexplainable and try to piece together what happened. You are listening to Locations Unknown.
What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Locations Unknown. I'm your co-host, Joe Erado, and with me, as always, is a guy who can touch MC Hammer, Mike Vandebogart.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you once again to all of our amazing listeners for tuning in on this special Halloween episode. Before we get going,
didn't cue up any Halloween noises.
It's okay.
I mean, what is it?
Not really, but we'll let it slide.
All right.
First, before we get going, just a couple of quick Patreon shout-outs. So thank you to Heather Armstrong, Kristen Ellsworth, Angel Overbay, and Michelle Eldaco. So thank you for supporting the show. We always say this, but it's because of people like you that we kept going, and we've been getting new equipment and all the cool things that are happening.
And now the network.
The network.
Original contribution to the network.
Yeah, so thank you for supporting the show, and I'm super excited for this episode. We haven't done... I mean, this is still a disappearance on a larger scale, and it adds in some paranormal stuff that I'm really excited to talk about.
Oh, yeah. This will be a fun one.
I was telling Joe before we started, I even started rewatching the AMC show called The Terror. It's a really good show about this expedition that went missing.
See, and I haven't seen it, so I'm going to be really excited to.
You don't know this case at all, right?
I don't know anything about this.
That's shocking. I remember learning about this in grade school in like history class.
I wasn't a good student. I wasn't like a naughty kid, but like I also,
listen.
I had ADD, and I was just like, oh, butterflies.
Yeah.
I didn't learn about anything.
So
all my knowledge I've learned in the last 10 years as an adult.
Yeah, well, hey, at least you're learning. So, if you want to call the show and leave us a funny voicemail, mean voicemail, whatever that may be, you can call 208-391-6913. Just remember, anything you say will be used on a future show, potentially.
Yes.
You can support us, obviously, through Patreon, YouTube memberships, subscriptions on Apple and Spreaker. We have a website on our store that you can buy some limited swag. We're gonna really start ramping that up.
Oh, we have a hat issue.
We have a hat issue.
So to the listener, I won't say your name, that never got your hat. We were drop shipping some of them, and apparently that style of hat is just gone now. So Mike and I are trying to find a new style of hat that doesn't look bad. So as soon as that we get that resolved, and it could take a while, but we'll send you a hat. I think I'll just cover your hat. You'll get a free one.
There you go. Outside of that, any updates on your end, Joe?
No.
All right.
All right, everybody, let's gear up and get out to explore Locations Unknown. (1845). Sir John Franklin led 129 men on the HMS Erebus and HMS Terror into the Arctic, vanishing without a trace and sparking one of history's most haunting mysteries. This Halloween, we explore the eerie legacy of the Franklin expedition, ghostly sightings around shipwrecks, chilling whispers near graves on Beechey Island, and cursed artifacts that bring misfortune to those who dare disturb them. Was it lead poisoning, starvation, or something supernatural that doomed the crew? Join us this week as we dive into the deep end of the Arctic's frozen secrets. I'm very excited for this.
I am too, but before we get going, I just have to mention, I always like seeing what goes on outside our window, and somebody in like this crazy dune buggy with these like huge LED antennas drove down the street. Just like,
Was he doing a wheelie or anything?
no.
Just in a dune buggy?
Yeah.
So we have a problem in Milwaukee where a bunch of groups will just ride around on not legal vehicles.
Yeah, like
in
dirt
hordes.
bikes. And, yeah.
And they'll just be popping wheelies and doing like crazy stuff and causing chaos. And they just drive around and no one's stopping them.
Yeah.
They're just, and I enjoy it actually.
It's
I like
happened
watching
while
the
we've
tricks.
recorded in the past.
Yeah, they
Funny.
just drive by. So
Yeah. Sorry, back to this amazing case.
yeah, I'm super excited for this because I barely even read that intro ahead of time because I was excited to like come in this raw. So this is awesome. So our stories take place in the Victoria Strait. It was first explored and charted in the 1830s during British expeditions led by Captain George Back and Sir John Ross. They were among the early explorers of the Arctic archipelago. So the sublocation that we're going to talk about is near King William Island. So King William Island was first sighted by the British explorer James Clark Ross in 1830 during his search for the Northwest Passage. So this is in the Canadian Arctic. The Netsilik Inuit presence in the area. The Netsilik Inuit, a group within the larger Inuit population of Arctic Canada, have traditionally inhabited King William Island and surrounding areas for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They developed a deep knowledge of the island's challenging environment, relying on hunting, sea mammals, fishing, and using sleds to navigate the ice. So, we'll talk a little bit about the ships since we're not really doing a location. The Franklin Expedition's two ships, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, were British Royal Navy vessels specifically outfitted for Arctic exploration in their 1845 attempt to navigate the Northwest Passage. So the HMS Erebus was originally a bomb vessel, a type of ship designed to withstand the heavy recoil of mortars. It measured 105 feet in length and was heavily reinforced to survive ice conditions, including an iron-plated hull and additional structural supports. The ship was fitted with a steam engine from a former locomotive, allowing it to navigate ice-laden waters at around 4 knots. Other modifications included heating systems and desalination equipment to provide fresh water for the crew.
These ships, for their time, were pretty advanced.
I didn't know they were doing that to ships at that time.
Yeah, well, and you'll learn, though.
Desalination?
Yeah, you'll learn that even with this technology, obviously the power of the Arctic was too much to overcome. But for their time, these ships were pretty
Like
advanced.
state of the art.
State of the art, I mean, for the mid-1800s.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So as the flagship, Erebus was under Franklin's command, housing him and some senior officers. It led the expedition, intended to be the main vessel for navigation through uncharted Arctic waters. So now we'll talk about the Terror. Slightly smaller than the Erebus, the Terror was also built as a bomb vessel, measuring about 100 feet, so 5 feet shorter. Like Erebus, it was heavily reinforced and fitted with similar steam propulsion to help navigate the ice. Terror had experience with extreme conditions, having survived severe weather in both the War of 1812 and earlier 1836 1836 Antarctic expedition under James Clark Ross. This made it a reliable choice for the Arctic exploration. Commanded by Captain Francis Crozier, Terror provided additional storage and accommodation for the crew, as well as another source of propulsion. It supported Erebus and was critical for redundancy in case one vessel encountered issues. So it sounds like they had everything pretty much covered, or so they thought.
So they thought, and they had a well-stocked provisions to last them for several years. But yeah, you'll find that it was just.
I'm so excited now.
Yeah, I won't spill any of the details. So
all right.
I'll let you keep going.
So we'll talk about some of the experiences they had in the winter months with some of the animals. They had to deal with polar bears, the most violent of all the bears, Arctic foxes, seals, caribou, and other Arctic birds. What was the rule? It's if it's black, fight back. If it's brown, lay down. If it's white, good night.
I don't know.
That's what I've heard, like how you deal with bears.
Okay.
Like if it's a white one, like
so if it's a polar bear, just
you're done. Sorry, you're just done.
You're done.
Yeah. Extreme cold and ice encapsulation. So sub-zero temperatures. The Arctic winter temperature often drops below 30 degrees Fahrenheit or 34 degrees Celsius. The constant exposure to such extreme cold would have posed serious risks of frostbite and hypothermia, especially during tasks outside of the ships.
So from two people that live in a colder climate, we once in a while it will get down to like minus 15 with like a minus 30 wind chill for like a day.
5 years ago, it was one day it was minus 30 with a minus 60 for half the day.
Yeah. So like when I was researching this episode, it gave me, having experienced cold like that on a very limited basis, these guys had to go through that for months in
just living it,
constant darkness, and in a sailboat built in the 1840s, like or in the early 1800s.
I thought it was steam powered. Are you getting ahead now?
No. I mean, it's still a sailboat. It's like,
oh, okay. It just had additional propulsion.
Yeah. So like, I mean, it's a wooden sailboat from the early 1800s.
Old wooden ship.
Like can't be very warm.
The San
like,
Diego.
Yeah. So I know it just gave me appreciation for having experienced cold like that on a very limited. These men had to live through that for months and survive somehow.
Yes. That'd be crazy.
Yeah.
Oh, and I screwed up the quote. It's diversity.
Oh.
Ron, do you even know what diversity is? It's an old wooden ship. No, Ron.
No, Ron.
All right. Strong Arctic winds. In addition to the cold, they experience intense winds that can reach 20 to 40 miles an hour and sometimes in stronger gusts. These winds drastically lower the feels-like temperature, making it seem much colder than the actual air temperature. Yeah, I don't want negative 30 and then a fan in my face.
Yeah, right.
Just moving it past you at 40 miles an hour.
Yeah.
Icebound ships. So starting in 1846, Erebus and Terror became icebound in the Victoria Strait, preventing the crew from progressing. Once trapped, the ships would have shifted with the pack of ice rising, risking hull breaches and compounding the crew's isolation. So getting stuck. During the winter, ice in the Victoria Strait could reach 6 to 10 feet thick, creating dense multi-year sea ice. This type of ice is formed over successive years and is much harder and more resistant to breaking up than newly formed ice. Limited mobility. So once the ships were locked in ice, the crew's ability to find alternative routes, hunt, or even move camp was severely limited. So on top of all this, it's snowing. Yeah. So although snowfall in the Arctic is generally light due to the dry air, persistent snow and blowing snow can still create poor visibility and other hazardous conditions. Snow cover over the ice would also make travel on foot more difficult, requiring additional effort from already weakened men. And then because of all this, limited shelter options. Although the ships were insulated and built to withstand some cold, they were not designed for long-term survival in extreme Arctic conditions. If the men had to spend time away from the ships, they would have faced severe exposure risks. And then continuous darkness.
That would be the hardest, I think.
Yeah.
You're dealing with all that other stuff, and it's just dark 24 hours a day.
Yes. So by early November, the crew would have entered a period known as the polar night, where the sun does not rise above the horizon. This lasts until mid-January, with some areas experiencing near total darkness for 24 hours each day. Yeah, that's just hell. This yeah, let's go there.
Yeah, right.
All right, tell us about Sir John Franklin.
So, normally we have a character profile. Since he was the leader of this expedition, I thought it fitting to kind of talk about Sir John Franklin a little bit. So, obviously, his remains, they have found some of the remains of the crew, very limited number of the crew, but the vast majority of the crew's remains remain uncovered, including Franklin's, and are scattered across the Arctic terrain and possibly still within the ships. He was a male. He was age 59 when they set out. Body description. So obviously this happened a long time ago, so we don't have detailed...
He was a male, and Danny DeVito.
Well, he was described as a podgy, balding man of middling height.
Danny DeVito.
That's how he would have probably been between 5'6" and 5'8", which was pretty common at that time period for Englishmen. That was kind of the average. We don't know his weight, but he was often described as stout. So,
Yeah, his paintings do him no justice.
no, he had light brown hair, and it was grain based
look at
on
this picture.
portraits of him. His eyes, based on portraits, were either shade of blue or light brown. Obviously.
What's his name from Animal House?
I know who you're talking
John
about. Belushi.
John Belushi. Kind of looks like John Belushi in this painting.
So, typical clothing and gear that he and his crew would have worn during this expedition. So, standard Royal Navy uniform. Franklin, as a British officer, wore a standard Royal Navy uniform, which included a woolen frock coat, waistcoat, and trousers. These garments were designed more for formal naval duties rather than extreme cold, so layers were usually added for warmth. Wool and flannel layers, so woolen undergarments and flannel shirts were essential for warmth. The British Navy commonly used wool because it retained heat even when damp, a crucial factor when you're in the Arctic.
Yeah.
They also would have a silk and wool layer, so this is to protect against extreme cold. Additional layers of silk and wool were incorporated. Silk undershirts were lightweight and helped retain heat, while wool served as an insulating layer, keeping the body warm during frigid temperatures. For coats, they usually wore fur-lined coats and hoods. Fur-lined coats and hats were likely worn, as furs offered some of the best protection against Arctic winds. While they didn't use as much fur as Inuit clothing, fur trim on hoods, cuffs, and collars provided a lot of critical insulation. And finally, for the footwear, they would wear heavy leather boots lined with wool or flannel. However, the design didn't always keep out moisture effectively, leading to frostbite risks. In later Arctic expeditions, explorers realized that lighter, softer footwear was more effective, but Franklin's team was limited by the gear available at the time. So, wrapping it up, they also wore gloves made of thick wool. You get a theme here. Wool. They liked wool a lot. Yeah. Was used for dexterity, with fur mittens worn over them for additional warmth. Arctic winds make exposed skin extremely vulnerable to frostbite, so layered hand protection was essential. Now, this last bit of information I found extremely interesting. So the ship had a primitive heating system provided by the steam engine. So both ships were outfitted with small steam engines adapted to help generate warmth inside the ship, which was a novel addition at the time. However, this heating would have been limited and obviously very inadequate for temperatures such as 30 degrees below zero. So they also were reinforced with insulation and added hull strength to withstand the ice, but these measures were primarily for the structure of the ships and not for personal warmth. So obviously when they were designing these ships, they didn't think about, warmth of the crew probably wasn't primary. Their primary concern was the ships can't break up when they hit ice. So
yeah. It doesn't matter how warm you are if your ship's sinking.
I'm guessing every guy in this ship was just constantly the coldest he's ever been in his life.
Jeez.
I can't
Unless you work in the engine room.
Maybe, yeah.
Usually it's pretty warm down there.
Yeah. Probably was just a brutal expedition. I can't even imagine. Personality of John, so he was often described as determined, kind, and dutiful officer, but also somewhat naive and overly optimistic, especially when it came to Arctic exploration. So people described him as courageous and committed, compassionate and well-liked, optimistic, perhaps to a fault, and obviously very loyal, but he lacked practical survival skills. So probably not the best choice to lead an expedition in the Arctic, but he was the one that they picked. As far as medical issues, because of the time this case occurred, we really don't know if he suffered from any medical issues, but he did experience extreme starvation during his 1819 to 1822 expedition of Canada's northern coast. So some have speculated that probably took a toll on his body and potentially could have caused lasting medical issues that he may have experienced. So, like I said, though, medicine was pretty primitive still at that point, and we don't have a lot of good records on what he might have been suffering from. So, occupation of Sir Franklin, his career began in the Royal Navy at age 14, and he went on to serve for over 3 decades. He participated in major naval battles, including the Battle of Trafalgar, and served on multiple exploratory missions. He obviously was an Arctic explorer, and he served as the lieutenant governor of Van Diemen Land, which actually is present-day Tasmania. So he served there from 1837 to 1843, so that's kind of interesting. And he's also a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society, which is, fits in with Arctic exploration. And so experience in the wilderness. So although he was brave and committed, Franklin was not well prepared for the challenges of Arctic survival. He relied heavily on the traditional British naval approach and was less inclined to adopt indigenous survival techniques. So he was one of those that would really just kind of stick to the book. And even if the local Inuit people were doing something that probably made far more sense, he was not very likely to pick up those practices. So, and a lot of people attribute his adherence to conventional methods, coupled with his lack of survival skills, probably played a significant role in some of the decisions that were made that led to what happened to this expedition. So that is kind of a summary of our friend Sir John Franklin. We'll get right into the timeline.
Sounds like I would have been friends with that guy.
He sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I would. He sounds like he's awesome.
They portray him very similar to that description in the show I was talking about.
Okay.
Very nice.
Is he played by Danny DeVito?
No, he's played. Remember the original Spider-Man? The guy who played the octopus guy with the mechanical arms?
Oh.
He's played by that guy.
I know who you're talking about. I don't know his name.
Great actor for the role, and
Yes.
they kind of got his personality right based on what I researched.
Alfred Molina.
Yeah.
That guy.
That guy.
Yeah.
Is he still alive?
He's 71.
Yeah. So yeah,
He's a great actor. I like him a lot.
He's the guy who plays Sir John Franklin in the AMC series, and I thought they did a pretty good job matching his personality to what he was really like. So our story starts out in 1844. So Sir John Franklin, like we said, a seasoned Arctic explorer, is chosen by the British Admiralty to lead an expedition to find the Northwest Passage. On February of 1845, the Admiralty commissions the 2 ships for the mission, the HMS Erebus and the HMS Terror, which had been modified with reinforced hulls, steam engines, and additional stores for food supplies. Captain Francis Crozer, an experienced Arctic navigator, is appointed as the commander of the Terror and Franklin's second in command. So, the expedition departs on May 19th of 1845. They make a couple of stops along the way in Greenock, England, with Franklin as captain. The total crew was 129 officers and men, and they carried provisions for 3 years, expecting to be at sea for up to 2 years. And I think I must have missed the section about the crew, but so the crew was made up of a mix of military and non-military. So you had some people in the Royal Navy and Marines on board, but you also had non-military people, like trade people almost, so they were good. Basically, think of everything you would need to repair a ship.
Oh, okay.
So you've got like carpenters,
blacksmiths, carpentry,
blacksmiths, cooks, doctors.
Yeah.
You had kind of a
You
mix.
have to bring a city with you.
Yeah, and the ages varied wildly too. So as young as 18 up to Franklin, who was 59, but the average age was in the early 20s of the crew. So pretty interesting. So now it's between June and July of 1845. The ships make stops in Scotland and Greenland, where crews rest and send letters back home. The ships are last sighted in July by British whaling vessels in Baffin Bay, close to the entrance of Lancaster Sound. This would be the last confirmed sighting of the expedition. So now it is September of 1845. This drags into 1846. This is what's considered the first winter. So their first winter stuck up there. So after departing England and making final stops in Greenland, the ships likely wintered in 1845 and through 1846 on Beechey Island, located near the entrance to Wellington Channel and in the Canadian Arctic. This site was determined through archaeological finds during subsequent searches for Franklin. Evidence of the encampment, including discarded provisions, equipment, and the graves of 3 crew members, pointed to the island as the expedition's first wintering location. So, speaking of the graves, the graves of 3 crew members, John Torrington, William Brain, and John Hartnell, were discovered on Beechey Island in 1850 by search parties looking for the expedition. It is unknown what these men died from, though forensic studies conducted later on their well-preserved bodies suggest possible factors such as scurvy, lead poisoning from canned food, and other malnutrition-related issues. These findings really start to paint a picture of what these guys were going through from an early part of the expedition. And one thing that is really interesting is they started using canned food that was soldered with lead in it. So these guys would have been just eating lead-tainted food for the whole expedition. Which we all know what exposure to lead will do to an adult. It will slowly make you go crazy.
Yeah.
Who's the famous painter that used to lick his paintbrush? He painted with lead paint and he went mad. Oh. Famous painter. I can't think of a... Joe is looking this up for my curiosity.
Heck yeah, let's see.
Vincent Van Gogh. Yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah, over his life.
I went to his museum in Amsterdam.
Yeah, he'd paint and then he'd lick the paintbrush clean for new paint, and it was lead paint.
Yeah, and that's why he chopped his ears off, or his ear.
Yeah, he was little nuts towards the end.
Yeah, don't do that.
Supplies and activities. So findings suggest that the crew used the time to maintain their equipment and gather resources, possibly attempting repairs on the steam engines and preparing for the spring thaw. The supplies include canned food, which was an experimental preservation method at the time, though later analysis showed it may have caused lead contamination. So the winter stay at Beechey Island was likely planned, as the Admiralty had instructed Franklin to wait out ice conditions if necessary. So other issues they would have encountered in this first winter were health-related. So there was a lot of isolation, lack of fresh food. One common problem was scurvy, which is a vitamin C deficiency, and
yeah, you're in the dark all the time. You're not even getting it from the sun,
and
let alone your food.
I believe they were drinking some kind of like lemon mixture, but it wasn't enough.
Okay.
And some of the things that happen when you have scurvy are like obviously extreme fatigue, but bleeding from your gums. So. Talk about you're stuck somewhere, it's 24 hours of darkness, it's super cold, and you've got guys walking around like bleeding out their mouths, and it seems like kind of like a
no bueno,
a nightmarish situation.
Yes.
Moreover, forensic tests conducted on the island graves indicate high levels of lead in the bones, which researchers believe was caused by the soldering used in the cans.
I mean, where else would it come from?
Yeah, and like I said, lead poisoning could have caused cognitive and physical impairments among the crew. So this would just compound all of the other things. Now, if that wasn't enough, the ships...
Look at how desolate this is without ice and snow.
I know. It's a desolate place.
There's just nothing.
So obviously you got all that going on, but you still have to worry about the ships. So the ships were designed for cold weather, but this is extreme. So... the ships were already starting to show severe strain. The machinery is breaking down. So it's just tough. It's just an all-around tough environment. So we're now fast-forwarding to September of 1846 through 1847. This would be known as the second winter, and this was the bad winter. If you thought the first winter was bad, the second winter wins that contest. So... by September 1846, both ships had become icebound in Victoria Strait, just off the northwest coast of King William Island in the Canadian Arctic. The location was considerably further south than Beechey Island, where the crew had spent their first winter. The ships were locked in dense multi-year ice, which would trap them for the next 2 years. So They were trapped in this spot for over 2 years at this point. So at this point, survival is getting really hard for these gentlemen. So this is when actually
They went really far south. They're almost at like mainland Canada.
Yeah. So is that
This is King William
Island? Where's the Victoria Strait? Does it say it on there?
I'll search it just so it pops up.
Um,
They used to put all the labels in here. I wonder if that's a setting.
So this would be around the time that sorry, I lost my spot here.
That's my fault.
It was your fault. No, I'm kidding.
So yeah, here's the island they were on. So they had to like walk over there. This King William Island is this one. Here's Victoria Strait.
Well, what's the distance? It looks like
As the crow flies right to the shore of King William Island, 36 miles from the center of Victoria Strait.
yeah. And that's hard walking.
Yeah, and that's, again, as the crow flies, you know they're not walking in a straight line.
Yeah. So this would be around the time when Sir Franklin actually died. So he died.
He got off easy.
Right?
Like, seriously.
So Captain Crozer of the Terror and James Fitzjames of the Erebus took over command. So a note from King William Island recorded that 24 men had already died by April 1848, including Franklin. Crozer and Fitzjames faced the challenge of managing the crew's declining health and finding ways to break free from the ice, though it was ultimately impossible due to the severe Arctic conditions. So, from things I read, some of the methods they tried to break the ice would be dynamite, I believe, dynamite or some type of explosive. I don't know if dynamite was invented yet.
I feel like it was.
Can you Google that so I don't?
They have a steam engine.
I guess.
Yeah, they had to have dynamite before that.
We're gonna look that up quick.
Yeah, keep going. I'll look that up.
Okay. So when was dynamite invented?
1867.
So it wasn't
Oh,
dynamite.
no, it wasn't.
Not dynamite.
Wow. So just black powder?
Must have been.
Yeah, just a mix of black powder.
Yeah. So one of the interesting things, and I will get into this later on, is the expedition did have interactions with the Inuit, the local Inuit of the area. So they weren't 100% isolated from humans. But as we get into this later on, you'll understand why it didn't provide more help. You know,
I was just going to say, like, there's people living there.
Yeah.
Or were they like...
Well, we'll get into it.
It's understandable, I guess, why they wouldn't help them, but...
So, in the following years, Inuit accounts gathered by search expeditions would describe sightings of men hauling sledges across the ice, suggesting that some crew members attempted overland escapes. The Inuit also described seeing abandoned ships locked in ice. Artifacts from the expedition were later traded with Inuit hunters, including metal and wooden objects from the Erebus and Terror, corroborating that the crew was active in their second winter, likely scavenging and modifying supplies for survival. So there's also a lot of evidence, and there was a note found on King William Island that indicated the men planned a desperate escape attempt. So knowing that remaining on the icebound ships was unsustainable, the survivors gathered supplies and prepared to trek overland towards the Black River on the mainland, hoping to reach safety. However, obviously because of the conditions, their health and physical condition was very deteriorated at this time, and sadly, none of them survived. I
don't get this.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people say, like, how is staying on the ship a bad thing? It's like a really good, as long as like the hull's not breached. Like, I feel like you go in the bottom of the ship and you insulate.
Well, I think they're running out of food. Like, they had enough food for 2 years.
Yeah.
So, and they were locked in the ice for 2 years. I think they probably were like, we're going to starve to death on the ship.
Like, there's no polar bears to hunt or anything
well,
like
we'll
that?
get into that.
Okay, all right. I'm getting ahead of them.
You're getting ahead of. So, like I said, the second winter was the breaking point and marked the expedition's descent into crisis. The severe cold, lack of fresh food, and diminishing morale made survival nearly impossible. Later forensic studies on some of the remains found on King William Island and nearby sites confirmed most of the expedition crew were suffering from scurvy, tuberculosis, and lead poisoning. So
There's the trifecta of miserable.
Yeah.
On top of the weather.
And to top it off, not only was the canned food contaminated with lead, but they also had used lead pipes for the ship's drinking water system. So all the fresh water they were drinking had lead in it as well. So they were getting high doses of lead on a daily basis. So
for 2 years straight.
Yeah. So by April 22nd of 1848, the crew finally abandons the ships. So at this point, there's only 105 officers and men remaining of the 129, and they're under the command of Captain Francis Crozer and James Fitzjames. They abandoned the ships. A note left on King William Island indicates that the men intended to march south towards the Black River, which I mentioned earlier, which is on the Canadian mainland. So this note was later discovered by search parties, and it's also referred to as the Victory Point Note. And it records that Sir John Franklin had died on June 11th of 1847, along with 24 other men. This document is the only written record of the crew's intentions and provides some insight into the plight that they were going through. So, spring of 1848, the crew begins hauling heavy sledges containing supplies and boats overland across the ice. This would have been a grueling endeavor in their weakened condition from starvation, scurvy, and lead poisoning, tuberculosis. Some of them were suffering from pneumonia. So, and things like that probably spread like wildfire in confined space of a ship. So, a lot of artifacts were recovered in subsequent searches. So, they found abandoned equipment suggesting that some groups tried to proceed independently, likely due to illness or injury that slowed down the larger groups. Inuit hunters encountered small groups of Englishmen along the island, reporting sightings of men dragging sledges and appearing severely malnourished. Inuit oral histories mention interactions with the struggling men who repeatedly had difficulty navigating the ice. These accounts would later be confirmed by physical evidence left behind. So, like I said, they did have encounters with the local Inuit population. So they weren't completely isolated. By late spring of 1848, as supplies ran out, some men appeared to have died and been left along the route, as evidenced by skeletal remains later discovered at various sites. The remains often showed signs of malnutrition, scurvy, advanced lead poisoning, which we've stressed over and over impaired their health. So there was also grim evidence found in the 1980s and 1990s. They revealed cut marks on the bones found on King William Island, suggesting that in their desperation, some of the men resorted to cannibalism. These grim findings were corroborated by Inuit accounts that mentioned seeing human bones that had been cut or broken, possibly for extracting the marrow.
That's insane.
So, I mean, you got to think, you get hungry enough and desperate enough.
And you're insane from lead poisoning?
You're going to do whatever you can to survive, so.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. So, it's now, the time period is 1849 to 1850s. By 1848, British search expeditions were launched, with subsequent years seeing a massive international effort to locate Franklin's men. Various expeditions searched both by sea and overland, driven by increasing public concern and pressure from Franklin's wife, Lady Jane Franklin. The searchers were initially focused on the Beaufort Sea area, but later expanded as Inuit accounts redirected efforts to King William Island. During these searches, artifacts from the expedition were discovered across King William Island, including fragments of clothing, cooking utensils, personal items. In later expeditions, explorers would recover additional remains, proving that small groups had likely survived for varying lengths of time as they attempted to head south. Inuit oral histories became invaluable, describing encounters with the starving men and pointing to locations where items from the ships had been left or traded. The Inuit also provided information about the 2 abandoned ships locked in ice, which later searches confirmed to be the Erebus and Terror. So in 1859, this is when the Victory Point note was found. We already kind of talked about that. This was the only documented evidence of the crew's fate, and it, like I said, confirmed that Franklin had died in 1847. And this became a crucial piece of evidence, revealing that some of the men had survived into 1848, but ultimately they all passed away. People have been fascinated about this expedition for a long time. So from the 1920s to the 1980s, archaeologists began systematic excavations on King William Island and Beechey Island, where the first winter graves were found. They recovered more bones and artifacts, allowing forensic scientists to study the remains for signs of all the things we've talked about: lead poisoning, scurvy, cannibalism. And it all just paints the same picture of the incredibly dire situation they were in. In the 1980s, forensic testing on the skeletal remains discovered signs, like I said, of extreme lead poisoning, and likely contributed to their mental and physical decline. Now, this is when the big discoveries happened. 2014. I couldn't believe it was this recent.
Yeah, that is like, there's still people excavating and finding stuff there.
So after decades of searching, the Erebus was discovered in 2014 near King William Island. The ship was largely intact and yielded numerous artifacts, allowing researchers to better understand the conditions on board during the crew's final days. Then, in 2016, the Terror was found, and it was remarkably preserved in deeper, colder waters. The ship's preservation provided researchers with even more artifacts and insights into the final months. The discoveries also confirmed many of the Inuit oral histories about the location and the fate of the ships. So it's really cool. You know, it's really cool how the Inuit pass down information in those oral histories, where it's not really written down, but it's passed down from generation to generation, and the information is incredibly accurate. That, you know, over 100 years later, they're able to verify a lot of what they were told.
They know how to play a telephone game.
Yes, they
Very
absolutely
good at
do.
it.
So that is kind of where the timeline ends, and where I'm going to get into. I've got some questions here. So, questions I had when I started researching the case. I obviously had heard of this case before, but I was thinking, like, so why weren't they hunting? There's polar bears, Arctic foxes, seals.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So there obviously is not any conclusive evidence one way or the other, but there's evidence, or the lack of evidence, that points to they weren't hunting or weren't able to hunt. So
here's a shot of the Erebus. This
Okay.
one's the Erebus, and then here's the Terror.
Okay.
So that's very well preserved.
Yeah. Deep cold water.
Yeah.
So some of the biggest evidence pointing to them not hunting was the lack of physical evidence of hunting. So, like, animal remains. So among the, I mean,
The evidence that they weren't hunting was the lack of evidence that
Yeah.
they hunted.
so among the artifacts and remains found on King William Island and Beechey Island, few to no animal bones associated with hunting or consumption by the crew have been identified. The lack of discarded bones or remains of local wildlife suggests that hunting likely wasn't a significant or a successful endeavor. And it's also very likely that they weren't hunting because of how malnutritioned they were. So they weren't getting food.
Like, they weren't good at it, didn't know how to hunt animals in the area.
Yeah,
and the Inuit were just not helping them.
Well, no, and the Inuit don't, through all of the information that was provided by the Inuit, none of the accounts of the crew include reports of effective hunting tools or practices, suggesting the men were ill-prepared to hunt local wildlife such as seals or caribou. So there are some researchers that think they may have tried animal trapping. So some researchers speculate that the crew may have tried to trap small animals like the Arctic fox, which are relatively abundant and might have been attracted to food stores or discarded items near the ship. However, there is no physical evidence confirming this. If they had managed to catch any small animals, they likely consumed everything without leaving bones or remains. So, and the biggest evidence that they weren't able to really figure out hunting or trapping was some of them resorted to cannibalism. So, I mean, if you're able to hunt even minimally, you're probably not going to resort to cannibalism.
Yeah.
Unless
the lead poisoning is bad enough, you're just going crazy.
Yeah. So the other question I had that I didn't know the answer to before looking into this was, why didn't the local Inuit population help the crew?
I've kind of been thinking that the whole time.
So, the local Inuit did encounter members of the Franklin expedition, but there were several reasons why they didn't provide substantial aid to the crew. So first, one of the biggest reasons was they still had limited contact and there was a language barrier. So Inuit oral history suggests that they had sporadic encounters with small groups of crew members, often at a distance or in passing. These brief encounters would have limited any opportunities for sustained interaction or support. And in some cases, the Inuit witnessed the expedition members dragging sledges or appearing sick and desperate, which may have discouraged prolonged contact. So they weren't stupid.
Yep.
And communication between the English-speaking crew and the Inuit was likely minimal, making it difficult for either side to express needs or intentions clearly. So, without a common language, the Inuit may have been unsure of the crew's situation or how to help them. So one of the biggest problems was, they looked sick, and the Inuit weren't stupid. They're not like these strange people show up. They're acting strange. They look sick. Like, life is already hard enough to survive just with the environment.
Yeah.
And now we're going to go expose ourselves to whatever is going on.
Yeah. Especially if it sounds like they communicate well. If they've had other tribes with encounters with English or first contact, what always happens?
Yeah.
Is a disease spreads and everything else. So if they know anything that's
part of it, from what I learned, was it's cultural too. So the Inuit possess deep knowledge of the art of Arctic survival, such as hunting techniques, clothing, and shelter building methods. However, the Franklin crew lacked this knowledge and may not have been able to adopt Inuit practices even if they observed them. The crew's reliance on their ships and supplies may have signaled to the Inuit that the men had their own resources and didn't need extensive assistance. And Inuit culture typically values autonomy and self-reliance in survival situations, so the Inuit may not have felt obligated to intervene unless specifically asked. Additionally, cultural misunderstandings could have created apprehension or a reluctance to get involved beyond surface interactions. And another one that is pretty self-explanatory is caution. So the Inuit, like I said, weren't stupid. They see these crew members suffering from lead poisoning, probably acting pretty crazy, scurvy, malnutrition. These are all very unusual behaviors and probably would lead to a lot of caution in, directly interacting. And according to some Inuit accounts, the crew appeared sickly and desperate, and some survivors may have been incoherent or erratic due to lead poisoning. This behavior would have made the Inuit very wary of interaction. And like Joe mentioned, Inuit communities were highly cautious about diseases introduced by Europeans, as they had limited immunity to illnesses like influenza and tuberculosis. So any visible signs of illness among the crew could have led the Inuit to keep a safe distance to protect their own community. Now, finally, this one makes a lot of sense too, is the Inuit lived a subsistence lifestyle, relying on seasonal hunting and foraging to meet their own needs. Offering sustained help to dozens of starving, unskilled men could have strained their resources, particularly during the harsh Arctic winter when food is scarce. So,
yeah, they're only going to get what they're only planning for food for themselves and their tribe.
They're going to prioritize survival of themselves and their families over,
as they should,
these crew that just appeared out of nowhere that are acting incoherent and look sick.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're not planning on that many people.
Their prior encounters with Europeans who brought diseases such as influenza and tuberculosis made them even more wary of interacting with them.
you're going to take our food, get us sick.
Yeah. So, I mean, while the Inuit communities were highly adaptable, they would not have been equipped to care for a large non-native group without impacting their own survival strategies. The needs of the Franklin crew far exceeded what the Inuit groups could sustainably provide. So,
yeah, that makes sense.
That is a great set of answers as to why the Inuit didn't help, and it all makes sense when you think about it.
They just can't.
They just can't.
Yeah, if it's you or me, it's like, oh, that's you.
And it's not like the crew was like coming off the ships fit and healthy. They were coming off after years of starvation, scurvy, tuberculosis. They're probably coughing, they're bleeding.
Yeah, they'd have to care for them and feed them.
Acting crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, probably very few people would offer assistance in that scenario at that time. So I totally understand why the Inuit didn't provide more assistance.
Yep, that makes sense.
Probably the biggest thing too is language. If they even spoke the same language, the Inuit could have provided like some level of assistance.
Yeah,
but these guys on the expedition, like I said earlier, were not. Even if they saw what the Inuit were doing to survive, they may have not have been capable of reproducing it.
Sure.
So because they just weren't skilled in survival like the Inuit populations who have lived there for, potentially thousands of years.
Yeah.
So very interesting. Now we get into some fun stuff. So paranormal encounters since the expedition. So a lot of strange things have been happening near the ships since they found them. So since the discovery of the wrecks,
like recently in recent times,
yeah,
or just ongoing?
Since 2014, 2016. So stories have circulated about ghostly figures appearing around the wreck sites. Some Arctic travelers, explorers, and modern-day researchers report feeling a strange presence or seeing shadowy figures moving around the wrecks as if members of the crew are still guarding the lost ships. So that's creepy. There's also the 3 crew members that were buried on Beechey Island. So these have inspired a lot of stories of restless spirits. So visitors and explorers to the island over the years have reported an unsettling feeling near the graves, with some describing hearing disembodied voices or feeling as if they were being watched. The grave's remote location and the presence of bodies of Torrington and the others add a chilling atmosphere to the site. So that is a little creepy. Now, this one would freak me out the most because I'm not a big into scuba diving. A few divers who have explored the wrecks have actually described an unsettling feeling when inside the ships, with some going on to report faint, unexplained noises like footsteps or murmuring while they're scuba diving.
Oh, that'd be creepy. If you're in the ship,
Yeah.
and you're hearing people talk.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're isolated in, enclosed space in this like really old ship where, 120 people died.
Yeah, no, thank you.
So, and naturally, the Franklin expedition has attracted the attention of paranormal enthusiasts and ghost hunters, some of whom have claimed to feel the presence or witness ghostly activity near artifacts recovered from the expedition. A few museums housing the Franklin expedition artifacts report that visitors occasionally experience chills or a sense of sadness around these items, which has fueled a belief that the spirit of the crew lingers in connection with these personal belongings. And you know what I was thinking? We need to talk to Evan about this and get him up.
Oh, he'll talk for like 4 hours about it.
I know, but we should convince him to go and do an episode at the shipwreck sites.
Like with Josh Gates?
Yeah, or with his other buddy.
Or us?
Yeah.
No, I don't want to go up
I don't want to go to the
I don't want to go up there.
No.
We'll report from Milwaukee.
We'll do a live stream here and let him go.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think that would be I don't know how he would get there, but him and what's his friend doing the ghost show now? You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, SVC Explorers of the Unknown?
That would be a really cool episode.
That'd be a
to
really
do.
cool episode.
But I was thinking, when I was researching that, I was thinking of Evan.
I don't know if they have the budget for this.
Not yet.
That'd be like an expedition. Not yet.
Maybe Josh Gates' show.
I was going to say they'd have to involve Josh Gates.
Yeah.
Because they can get the ratings.
We should talk to him, though.
Yes, 100%.
So, official theories of what likely happened. So, obviously, we've covered some of these in length. Lead poisoning, starvation, scurvy, disease, tuberculosis, and pneumonia was a very common disease, cannibalism, and hypothermia and exposure. So those are the likely theories. of what probably happened. Now I've got a lot of deep end theories. You ready for deep end?
Yes, I want all the deep end.
So we're going to go from kind of deep end to like bottom of the Mariana Trench deep end.
I want all the deep end. It's Halloween.
So one of the theories that has gained some following is mutiny and murder. So some people suggest as food supplies dwindled, tensions rose, and crew members turned against one another, leading to acts of mutiny and murder.
It doesn't sound very deep endish.
Well, the theory posits that fear, mistrust, and desperation could have driven crew members to take extreme actions against each other, including violence. There is no concrete evidence to indicate violent death by other crew members, but the theory is largely based on the dire circumstances and the mental state the crew had been in. So that's one theory. Paranormal. Some speculative theories suggest paranormal influences such as hauntings, curses, and interactions with supernatural forces in the Arctic. These ideas lean on the mysterious and isolated nature of the Arctic landscape, suggesting that the crew may have encountered something otherworldly that led to their demise. And this ties into some of the Inuit folklore.
Okay.
Like, there's some like spirits that guard the Arctic, and some people think that maybe the expedition angered the spirits, which led to their
getting
outcome.
ice locked and the whole deal.
Yeah. Another crazy theory is alien abduction.
Of course.
So
Cue Giorgio Papadopoulos, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever his name is.
I mean, this is just because of the isolation that they would have been in and the inhospitable Arctic environment would have made them ideal candidates for extraterrestrial encounters. So there's not a lot to go on that theory. So another one is a sacrifice to the mythical Arctic entity. So inspired by Inuit mythology, some have speculated that the crew encountered and offended a mythical Arctic entity or spirit, leading to their downfall as a form of supernatural retribution. This theory suggests that the men may have been punished for trespassing or violating local spiritual taboos. Like I said, Arctic indigenous cultures have rich mythologies with spirits believed to inhabit the ice, animals, and land. Stories of such spirits are woven into the fabric of the harsh landscape, but obviously there was no practical or physical evidence to suggest that. So that is the end of my deep end theories. We've got Arctic entity, aliens, supernatural, paranormal, and murder and mutiny. Plus all the other normal ones.
Just exposure.
Exposure, scurvy, lead poisoning, tuberculosis, pneumonia.
Well,
starvation.
So I think it's that, obviously.
Yeah.
But
or is it?
But I wanna do the Halloween version of what my off the deep end pick would be. So I think my real pick is just exposure, scurvy, lead poison, just the whole gamut of all the shit that they ran into.
Yeah.
Excuse my language. I'm gonna have to put explicit now. Or do we get one?
No, we'll probably have to put explicit.
Ah, crap.
Now two.
Yeah.
No,
that's right. So yeah, with all the stuff, I think it was that. Now my off the deep end pick. I like the idea of the spiritual,
the Arctic entity.
Yeah, like an Arctic entity.
Too.
Just kind of like.
That's what I'm leaning on for Halloween. It wasn't exposure. I think there was an Arctic entity, and they pissed it off by going up there.
I just can imagine them being like the howling winds, like in a snowstorm, and
hearing things
like causing people to go insane, run off into nowhere.
It wasn't the lead causing their mental issues. It was the Arctic entity screwing with them.
Yeah, it was kind of like a siren, but in the Arctic, just calling them and do weird things, controlling their thoughts.
Now, after our work with Evan on his ghost show, how much stock are you putting into some of these modern, more recent stories of ghost encounters around the ship or artifacts? Like the one where they're scuba diving in the ship is absolutely terrifying if that happened to me.
See, that's
It could just be your mind playing tricks on you,
humans
too.
have an incredible ability to create things in their brain. Like the placebo effect is a fantastic example.
Like you know what happened here. You're in this like old dark ship.
Exactly.
Your brain is like...
If you are like... Have you ever gone into a room and you can kind of feel the energy of the room? It almost makes you like... It's overwhelming.
Kind of, yeah.
Especially if it's a room that has any type of historical significance.
Yeah.
So now you know the story behind this and all of the emotion that's built up into it. And now you're going to scuba dive the wreck. I feel like you're going to feel something.
Yeah.
And is it because, like, it would almost be, if you wanted to do kind of like a scientific test, you got to have people dive that wreck that know nothing about it.
Be like, this boat was being towed empty and it sank.
Yeah, it was an old tank and everybody lived and it was fine. Like,
and then you tell someone else the actual story and then see what happens.
Well, just have them, or just tell people that don't know a bunch of stories like that. They're like, oh, not a big deal. We're just going to go check it out. It's a fun dive. It's an Arctic dive, whatever. And if they come back and like,
it wasn't the most horrific exploration in modern human history.
Yeah, exactly. But then you have to ask them non-leading questions that might elicit like, oh, you know, when I was down there, it kind of sounded like there's footsteps. It's so weird. Might have been like the ice crack. Like if they start coming up with things that like...
If like both people hear kind of the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or they report weird, strange occurrences and they don't know the story, that would make it more believable for me.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if I went there and I knew now what I know, I'd be like expecting it.
You would hear stuff too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It'd be more placebo effect.
Well, and if
it's all real.
It's real and terrifying.
And absolutely terrifying. Absolutely.
Yeah. I saw, we went to a museum in Alaska that had a bunch of artifacts from this expedition, and I don't remember feeling anything different when I was around them. Like they had tons of...
And you knew the story.
I didn't know it this well.
Okay.
I knew what happened, and they had all kinds of stuff up on the wall that you could read about.
See, now we should go back and see if all of a sudden you kind of feel differently.
Yeah.
And it's just emotion you created.
Yeah, it was cool. I wish... I probably have pictures of it. I feel like they had...
You should pull the pictures up and see if it's like an image. It's
Yeah,
like a ghost stand like right there or something.
After the episode, I'll look. I can't remember if I probably wouldn't have taken pictures of just like artifacts found on a sunken ship. I don't know. Maybe I did.
Like standing next to a fork.
Yeah.
You're like, this is really cool.
There's a plate. Like,
oh yeah, sweet plate.
There's a chair. That
you look at the image and it's going to be
recovered.
like the captain posing and eating on it in like ghost form, and you just never looked at the photo. You're like, oh my gosh, it's a ghost eating on the plate.
Then
in the
I go to
background.
show everyone, and it's back to just a plate.
Yeah, and you just have lead poisoning.
Yeah.
But how did you get lead poisoning? Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
You don't ever talk trash about the lore.
The old house I lived in had lead service line, so
probably
explains a lot now, right?
About who you are as a person. Like your old college house,
No.
or like when you were a kid.
No, the house I just moved from.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. You okay?
No, I mean they put something. They put something in the water to make the lead like inert. It doesn't.
That we'll find out years later made it worse.
Probably.
It actually just amplified it.
Yeah. Yeah, for those listening, Milwaukee unfortunately still has a vast majority of the houses have lead
pipe
water service lines. Because of the time my old house was built in 1950, and for some reason back in the 50s, I'm sure they probably knew lead was bad to ingest, but they still built water lines.
They're like,
with
oh,
it.
the water's moving through it fast.
Yeah.
It's not going to do anything.
So, and I believe in Milwaukee, they installed lead service lines up until the mid to late 70s.
Sounds about right.
And it was actually a big scandal. There was a company that was paying off politicians to put the lead lines in because...
Was it cheaper?
I mean, there is...
I guess it has to be,
There
right?
is a reason why they did it, but the
Like it held up better.
health consequences of it were known by the 70s.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to use lead for water.
That's going to be plastic pretty soon. In like 20 years, will be like, can you believe they lined their food with plastic?
Right.
Like all of our water pipes are plastic now.
I mean...
The ones that aren't copper.
Before the invention of plastic, everybody used glass.
Yeah, it was copper.
I feel like
copper kills bacteria. Like copper pipes for water is like great.
People were healthier. Well, my house had copper pipes in it, but the service line going into the house from the street was lead.
Oh, so it just didn't matter.
Yeah. But
Yeah, good thing you moved.
Yeah.
Good thing I didn't drink any water at your place.
Well, like when we had our kids, we only gave them bottled water.
Yeah.
We never.
So you were like just drinking it yourself? You're like, eh.
Well, the city would randomly test and send the results, and it was like under the limit that's, it's acceptable. Like it's very low.
The same people that made the food pyramid are telling you these are acceptable levels of lead.
Well, we won't get into that, but I don't even know how we got on that tangent, but
because we're talking about lead poisoning.
Lead poisoning, yeah.
And how you definitely have lead poisoning.
Because I saw the captain eating with the plate from the museum I was at in Alaska.
And bring it on home.
Bringing it on home. So with that, I hope everyone listening enjoyed this episode. I loved researching this because I love history.
This is a fun story. I can't believe I've never heard of this.
I'm guessing a lot of listeners probably have heard of the expedition, but not the details.
I probably heard about it and wasn't paying attention.
Anyone listening that liked this episode, go and watch the AMC show, The Terror. It's good.
Oh, and if you're someone from the AMC show, The Terror, give us a shout out.
Yeah. Dr. Octopus.
Scratch our back. Yeah, Doc Ock.
I don't remember his
Me
name.
either. But thanks again for tuning into our show. We appreciate you all for listening and sharing locations unknown with your friends and family. Be sure to like us and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, where you can find all the videos for each episode. Also, if you'd like to support the show monetarily, please visit the website or Facebook store to buy some sweet, sweet swag. We don't have hats for right now. Those are coming soon. Additionally, you can subscribe to our Patreon accounts on YouTube subscriptions, Apple subscriptions, X maybe sometime in the future, and that will help us on a monthly basis, and you'll have access to additional events and other shows. And lastly, when enjoying the beauty of nature, whether backpacking, camping, or
sailing
stuck
through the Arctic,
stuck in ice, always remember to leave no trace. Thanks, and we'll see you all next time. Happy Halloween.